I was the first man on Omaha Beach. Looked down that beach. The water was red, up flapping up against the sand. No telling how many got killed out in that ocean, and there was dead bodies everywhere. A shell had hit in my foxhole and knocked this kid's head plumb off. I couldn't even tell what he looked like. I had my pistol loaded with a hammer back and my hand on that trigger on that M1. And there was three of them. I knew I could get two of them, but I didn't know about that other. There was one during that winter when everything was so cold. It was raining, sleeting, and snowing, going into battle. And there'd been a company of some kind already fought there. And I guess we was going there to help them. And I seen wounded soldiers, sit down by a tree and freeze to death. Nobody there to help them, you know. Just absolutely freeze to death. Be icicles hanging on them. You know, well, when you're 18, 19 years old, that's kind of hard to take. And there was a German behind it, and he had his rifle pointing right at my belly. And the Germans had caught him, I guess, and they had put rope around the back of their head, into their mouth, and drug them to death. I looked them all over. They wasn't wounded nowhere, but they drug them until they killed them. That's the thing about the SS troopers. I hollered at him the second time, and he didn't move. And I up with my old .45 pistol, and I shot him, and his head fell off. I went down to see what I'd done, and I shot Hitler. This is the Purple Heart with a cluster from being wounded twice. It ain't hard to remember, it's hard to tell it. Hello, my name's William Norman Parker, but I go by the name of Bill. I'm Bill Parker. Everybody knows me by that name. I'm a veteran, of course, in the infantry, 116th Infantry. Where I was raised is in Oklahoma, down in the mountains. And I think the way I was raised in the mountains, in the creeks, and hunting and things, I think that was part of the reason I made it through the war. I think that I already knew how to shoot. I already knew how to get through the woods. And me and my brother played cowboy and Indian, and I'd hide, and he'd find me. But I learned a lot of things that way, and it worked out good in the Army. We did not have any electricity. We didn't have any telephones. We didn't have any gas. We burnt wood in the fireplace and wood in the kitchen stove. We used coal oil lamps. I used to tell that Dad would give me a .22 with one shell and tell me to get a squirrel. Anyway, I don't think it's quite that bad, though. I think probably had more than one shell, but that's the way I told it. And anyway, there was times that we didn't have any meat other than squirrels and rabbits. I got a call for the Army when I was in high school, and Dad went down and got me deferred for a month so I could finish school. And I never was very smart. But anyway, I was 18, and I had a good girlfriend. We wanted to get married, but I told her that we wouldn't until I got back, and I knew that I already had a call to the Army, and that I was either going to France or to Japan, and I didn't want her to be a widow at 19. So we didn't get married. Well, when I got on the big ship in New York City, and I didn't want to go. I went over and looked over the side of that ship, and I could see that the shore was right there. Well, like I had swam along a lot of times that far. And I just thought to myself, I'm going to get off of this thing going far enough. But I looked at that water, and it was full of ice and dirty as you could see. So I decided better stay on that ship. And they sent me on to England. I don't know exactly where, but we were close to a big prison called in the Moors, they called it. And we had to march around that big prison, and we took training there for the invasion. We got on landing crafts, and they had a beach they called Slapped in the Sand, and we attacked it. And every time I got in one of those landing crafts, I got seasick. I wasn't no sailor. I got sick going across the ocean. They'd put me on KPs, but I'd be sick. But the morning of the invasion, they gave us all a sack so we didn't have to put our heads over sides, you know. I never got a bit sick. I can't tell you the difference, but I never got sick. First night we were there, we just got off of the ship and was taking us somewhere, and they had an air raid. All of this air raid sirens went off. They took us down into a basement, and when they dropped them bombs, you could hear them going. Well, they had what they called a buzz bomb. I guess it had a motor on it, because as long as you could hear that motor, you was all right. But when it quit, you knew that thing was coming down. And when them bombs hit, you could nearly see them walls come in. They shook the whole thing, made them dust everywhere. That's the way they broke me in on first night I was in England. I was assigned to the 29th Division, the 116th Infantry, as a replacement. I was in the war cutting section. In fact, I was leading the war cutters. We had what they called a Bangalore torpedo that was about 6 foot long and about 3 inches or something like that around. It had amytal in each end and dynamite in the middle. A amytal is a lot stouter than dynamite, so when we set it off, why, it blew the wire. That's the way we cut the wire. Anyway, why, that's what I trained for in England, was to blow the wire. Well, June the 5th, we were heard there was when we were supposed to land it on June the 5th, and we were all ready. We had everything that they had ready to put us on a ship, and I don't think that we got on it. We got on it sometime that day because they water was so rough that they wouldn't land, and we stayed all night on that ship. The next morning they fed us beans for breakfast. I thought that was kind of peculiar. Got time to go, why we went over the side and went down netting that looked like rope ladders, but a lot of them. Sometimes the old water was so rough that we'd be way out away from the ship, and then we'd be against it. But anyway, I went down that. I had to get in the landing craft first because I was in the wire cutting section. I was the leader of the wire cutters, and that's the reason that I know to cross the beach first. I got off of the boat first with 5 men behind me. We was all carrying what they called Bangalore torpedoes, and when I went across the beach carrying it, I was loaded. Had it, my pack, my rifle, enough rations for 3 days. And when I got to the sand going across the beach, there was a machine gun hitting the ground right in front of me, kicking up dirt right about 3 foot in front of me. And I couldn't go back. I had to go forward. There wasn't no place else to go. But he never did raise it high enough to hit me. And when we got across the sand then, why, there wasn't anything to get behind except where the water had washed up against the shore and left about a foot, and we kind of got down behind that. And the pillboxes was shooting at us. And we had nothing to knock them out with. All we had was an M1 rifle and a few hand grenades, and we throwed the hand grenades trying to throw them into the pillboxes, but little old holes you had to throw through. We didn't get many of them in there. So anyway, why, we were pretty well hung up. We fought the Germans on the bank, and we had them whipped, but we couldn't go on account of the pillboxes. The boat that I landed on, the landing craft, there was me and 5 men got off of it, and a shell hit it and killed the rest of them. We were the only 5 that got off of it. A lot of us didn't land where we were supposed to, and we were one of them. But anyway, why, there wasn't anything to get behind but where this water had lapped up against it, had about a foot, and we were down behind that, laying on our bellies in the water, shooting at these soldiers on the bank. And that's just the way it happened. What we didn't kill, we run off. And I'm not going to tell you I killed any because I don't talk about that. But I will tell you this. I was a good soldier, and I could hit what I shot at. And I shot a wash tub full of ammunition. And I still don't know, not going to tell you I shot any of them, but you know whether I did or not. We, as soon as we got across to the wire, why, I stuck my Bangalore torpedo under the wire. Next man come along, stuck his in the end of mine, pushed it on until we got it under all of the wire, and then the last man set it off. And that had amytal so much stouter than dynamite, that made it blow straight up and cut the wire. And we had wire cutters then that any of it we didn't get blowed, we were supposed to cut. And if we didn't get it cut, we were supposed to fall on it, let the soldiers walk on us, but that wasn't going to happen. We were smarter than that. But anyway, we got the wire cut, and there wasn't nobody behind us. We hadn't even looked back till we got it cut, and then we looked back, and landing craft we was on got blowed up as soon as we got off of it. Killed all the sailors and all the soldiers that was still on it. I think I've read where there was 33 soldiers plus the Navy got blowed up that day. And I guess that is going on all down the beach, you know. I heard later then, I didn't know who knocked them out, but I heard later that a man on the battleship, head of the battleship, said he had orders to shoot way over our heads, not close to us, but he saw we were hung up, and he ordered the battleships in close to shore, and they shot directly over our head. Shells wasn't over 8 feet over our head, shooting at the pillboxes, and they knocked them out. After the battleships knocked the pillboxes out, why, we had already fought the Germans on the bank pretty well, so we went on fighting, and we went inland, I don't know how far, a mile or two inland, before dark come. And when it started getting dark, why, by that time I had 20 or 30 men following me. I don't know why, I was a private, but they were following me. They were some out of the 1st Division, some out of other divisions. It got mixed up on landing, you know. Anyway, why, when dark come, why, they wanted to know what I was going to do, and I said, I'm going to stay right here till daylight. And we did, and we weren't, I don't know, we was in the hedgerow country. But in daylight comes in, why, I was about out of ammunition, and the rest of them too. And I went back to the ocean. I knew all those dead men had ammunition. Now, I'm not going to tell you I got it off of the dead men, but I got ammunition, and my mind won't let me remember where I got it. I pretty sure I got it off of them, but I can't remember taking it. Anyway, I got the ammunition, looked at the beach. That's the first time I had seen it, and there was dead men everywhere. 116th Infantry lost 96% of their soldiers that morning, all on that beach. And anyway, I got ammunition. I saw some down a little further down where they were gathering up the wounded, and I walked down there, and I seen a man from my company. I tried to talk to him, but they had his head all wrapped up. He couldn't talk. So then I went back to our units, took ammunition back, and on the way back, I went by the pillbox, looked in it. The German that was shooting the machine gun at me, he had been killed, but he was just laying on top of the machine gun, and everything else was in it. And on the wall, they had numbers, and I guess in feet, of all across that beach. And the reason I think that machine gun didn't hit me, he was shooting with them numbers. And every time he shot, then he'd lower it. And that's the reason that he didn't shoot me. He wasn't aiming at me. He was just shooting by numbers. That's my guess now. I don't know. I think that's as good as we'll find. I don't know what. Maybe the Navy might have shot a shoe that one of them doors, because this Navy man brought his ships in close, and I give him a whole lot of credit for letting us move on. But and after we got that done, when we were inland, I don't know how many miles, but just a mile or two, not much. We started down a hedgerow. I see a little place in it, and I went by that low place, and there was a German soldier walking on the other side. I could have punched him in the ear with my rifle, but I let him go. I did throw a grenade over the fence, over the hedgerow, but it was just white phosphorus. I just imagine I just scared him. That is the first live German soldier I'd seen. I saw some in the pillboxes that was knocked out, but they wasn't alive. But anyway, I let him go. And that was morning, and we went on down, and I thought it was going north. I don't know where it was or not. But we went to a sunken road, they called them, and I went up that road. They'd had some big fights there. A lot of dead Americans, a lot of dead Germans, all burnt out equipment and stuff. But I went on up that road, and I come to the little town of Vierville-sur-Mer, France. And there was a captain or lieutenant or something there. And when I walked up with these 20 or 30 men following me, why, he said, "Sergeant, put your men in that hole. We're fixing to take this town." I said, "All right, but I'm not a sergeant. I'm a private, like the rest of these men." He said, "You're a sergeant now." From that day on, I was a sergeant. We took that town. That is Vierville-sur-Mer, France. We took it, went on we didn't take it exactly all of it. 115 Infantry of the 29th Division had went through it first, but they just went through the middle. We cleaned it up on each side, went on and fought our way into St. Lo, another big town. Anyway, just before we got to St. Lo, though, we all got back with our regular divisions. I got back with the 29th, and anyway, we went on to St. Lo and began fighting all across the hedgerow country. And you just fought from one hedgerow to the other one. It was like kind of like attacking, but after every hedgerow, you know. But anyway, we were kind of had them on the move, and we fought all the way across France. Somewhere over there in France, these sunken roads were in the fields where farmers would use them for roads, you know. I guess that's the reason they got sunk on it. They used them for years. But anyway, A shell hit in that sunken road, and a piece of it hit me in the foot. That's where I was wounded first. Went in just above my sole of my boot, but we were fixing to attack, and we did. So I didn't go seeing nothing about it. I could tell it was bleeding, but it didn't stop to see anything because we was attacking. 2 weeks later, then my foot had swelled up till I couldn't get my boot off. Anyway, I had to go back to evac station. Got back there, and it was in a tent, and there was two officers. I guess they were doctors. They supposed to been. One of them was a lieutenant. I don't know whether the other one's any more than that or not. But anyway, why, he looked at my foot and he said, "We're going to have to take it off. It's got gangrene in it." Well, you could have heard me plumb over here. You ain't taking my foot off. I was pretty bad about cussing then, and I had to throw that a little bit of that in. But anyway, why, a captain heard it. He come and looked at it, and he said, "No." Said, "Get you a bucket of hot water, fill it full of Epsom salt, and you soak that foot till it comes to a head." And that's what they did. And then they took it out from the top, and I've still got my foot. But as that captain walked off, he turned around and looked at them two lieutenants, and he said, "That's what my grandma would have done." So I still got my foot. That's where I got wounded first. But I went to the hospital, went to England sent me back to England for a little bit to the hospital. Looked down that beach. The water was red, flapping up against the sand. No telling how many got killed out in that ocean. And there was dead bodies everywhere. The 116th Infantry I was in lost 96% of their men that morning. We lost a lot of men that day. Not only us, but Omaha Beach had more casualties. I read that just a few days ago. We had 10 times more casualties than the one next to us had. They claim they lost 400 men, and we lost 10 times that many men. That's what I read. And there were bodies everywhere. I was the first man off of the landing craft, and I was the first man all the way across the water, all the way across the sand. And I never looked back, and I know that I was the first on Omaha Beach because we were the first to land. It ain't hard to remember, it's hard to tell it. But anyway, that's the way the invasion went. We didn't try to leave anything behind us that could get out and start shooting at us, you know. We had to nearly go into each house to make sure they didn't. And one of the deals I went in was just getting dark. You could still see this was a kind of an auditorium type deal. Windows down on the end. And I went into that to see if there was anybody in it. Of course, I carried that .45 pistol all the time, and when I went into a house, that's what I used. because so many places was tight you couldn't hardly use a rifle, you know. But I went into this auditorium, and I seen a big man down in the window. It was getting dark, but you could still see the outline of him good. And I hollered at him and told him put up his hands and turn around. And I didn't figure he could understand me, but they knew what I was talking about. We didn't have no trouble with that if one wanted to give up, you know. But this fella didn't move. Pretty good size. I hollered at him the second time, and he didn't move. And I up with my old .45 pistol, and I shot him, and his head fell off. Well, I thought that's kind of unusual, but I went down to see what I'd done, and I shot Hitler. It was a chalk bust to Hitler. But I shot his head off. After that, why, my men, every time they got a chance, they said, this Sergeant Parker first shot Hitler.
That's incredible.
But that is one of the things that went on that was kind of give us a laugh, you know. But we go in them houses, and I went into one morning, soldier right behind me. I just got into that, and there was a kitchen table turned over, a table, I didn't say a kitchen table, but, and there was a German behind it, and he had his rifle pointing right at my belly. And I had, it was raining that night, and sleeting and snowing, and I always cleaned my rifle at night when we quit, wiped it off and took shells out and make sure it worked, you know. Well, we went into this house, and there's so many of us in there, didn't have room for nothing, and I didn't clean it. And this German had this rifle right on me, and I had mine on him, and I pulled the trigger, and it just snapped. The only time it ever happened to me. And the soldier right behind me shot him, and he was behind that table, and the soldier right behind me shot him and killed him, of course. He saved my life right there. And that boy got killed that day. I never did even get to thank him for what he'd done. He got shot. The soldier that shot the other. Yeah, we was tacting, you know, and he was in my platoon, and he got killed. That bothers me, but wasn't my fault either. But he saved my life, and then he didn't get killed right at that time, but he lived before the day was over. But it wasn't like the movies. Somebody got shot, you just left them and went on with you. Well, you didn't have time to do nothing else. And I don't know how many asked me about if I was afraid. I wasn't afraid. I don't know why, but I imagine it's because of our training. We've been trained to do what we was doing, and I expect that is the reason. You know, if a man throwed a rifle on me now, that'd scare me, but it didn't then. Well, we done something to stop it, you know. There was just a lot of peculiar things happened, you know. And there was a lot of things you didn't want to tell. One of them, though, is not as bad as the rest of them, but give you an idea about the SS troopers. there was a division next to us, and I think it was the 2nd Division. They called and said they had 2 men missing. They had them out on patrol, and they'd been gone too long and wondered if we'd seen any. And they didn't. Of course, our officer said, we'll send a patrol out to see if they're down in front of us anywhere, you know. And I can't imagine anybody sending just 2 men out for a patrol, but I always took at least 5. And anyway, I went down in front of us a ways, about a mile and a half or 2, and I found them. And the Germans had caught him, I guess, and they had put rope around the back of their head, into their mouth, and drug them to death. I looked them all over. They wasn't wounded nowhere, but they drug them until they killed them. That's the thing about the SS troopers. Now the old German soldier, he was just like we were. But if you got to fight in the SS, you knew it. I usually got replacements at night when we fighting quit, you know, and we'd come in behind the hedgerows. Why, they'd bring me my replacements because I lost so many men a day. And anyway, this particular deal, why, I got a replacement that he looked like he was a 15, 16-year-old kid. I guess he was older than that, but he didn't look it. Anyway, I didn't know what to do with him, so I finally told him, I said, and I had a foxhole dug for spend the night in, and I told him, I said, you just be my runner, stay with me, and we're going to attack in the morning, so you need to rest. You could go lay down in my foxhole and try to get some sleep. And he did. And the next morning then they attacked it, and we happened to be in the reserve, so the 2 other platoons went before I did. But they were supposed to send a runner back to tell me when to move up, and they didn't do that. So I went up to see why they hadn't done it, and they had to take the fight across the road, I guess, and there still wasn't any reason they couldn't have told me, but they didn't. Anyway, when I got back, why, a shell had hit in my foxhole and knocked this kid's head plumb off. I couldn't even tell what he looked like. I couldn't seen him the night he come in. I didn't know what he looked like, but he was just young. Could have been 18, but he sure didn't look it. And I haven't got over that yet. I still remember that, but there wasn't nothing I could do about it. That is one of the things. When I was looking for the other platoon, why, I run onto the Germans and across the hedgerow, and I think maybe they was having a mail call or something because they were down in a bunch, and they had their rifles sitting, we called them stack when they put 3 or 4 of them together, and there was a machine gun sitting there, and I saw this as I went across the open field, and up at the end, there's always a gate where the farmers went through. There wasn't no gates, they were just openings in the hedgerows. Anyway, when I looked through there, there was a whole bunch of them in a wad down there, I think having a mail call maybe. But anyway, the machine gun sitting there, and about the time I seen them, Well, this fellow with the machine gun, he saw him, and he was running to get behind it, and I knew I should have shot him, but I didn't. I had a streak of wanting to run, so I run too, going down the hedgerow. About the time I got started good, why, he'd got on his machine gun, and he was cutting the brush right up beside of me. And these hedgerows was pretty high, but I was running down it, and I jumped that hedgerow sideways. And when I got it up there, he shot my M1 rifle that I had took from a soldier that night that looked nearly new. I'll give him a BAR because he was a big fella. But I mostly give it to him to get that new M1. And this machine gun had shot it all to pieces, shot it right in two. Well, I hit going down that hedgerow and I jumped it. I don't know how I could jumped it, but I did. Hit on the other side and running, and I was dragging my pack behind me. I told that they shot the straps off of it, but I don't think that could happen. So anyway, I unhooked my belt and let it all fall. Run clear on back to our lines and went over to get my platoon and going to move them up across the road. And this kid that I'd left in it was in my foxhole with his head blowed off. I come across a number of times dead Americans and Germans both. It was a real cold winter, and it was ice and snow everywhere. And that was the worst thing I ever seen. We had Americans that was wounded sitting down by a tree and freezing to death. That was nobody to help them, you know. And that was part of it. And then, I don't know, going to some of these battles where we had to go through where they'd already fought one, you know, why, we saw lots of dead Americans and Germans both. We were cut off in a farmhouse. The Germans was on both sides of us, and I went back and looked out of a door. Those farmhouses, they had their barns built on them right together, you know. And they had livestock in it. I think what really got us in trouble, I went up back there and I found a cow that had been shell had hit or something and broke her back in, legs down, and instead of me taking my knife and cutting her throat, well, I shot her. I think that's what brought them on. But, of course, they heard that shots, you know. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but I feel like it did. But I shot the old cow to get her out of her misery, you know. Went back up there then, and I looked out a wooden door that had a bloody hole in it like a latch, went through it, and there sat one of our Sharma tanks with the barrel right on that hole. And it just, in my mind, I said, it's going to shoot. And I jumped behind the rock wall that was there, and it blew that door off. And I come to find out why the Germans had captured it, and they were using it. But after he blew the door off, they didn't do nothing. I guess they backed it on out of there. And then that same deal, why, me and another sergeant was standing looking at our lines, figuring out a way we could get out of there that night and get around them, you know. And we had one about figured out. And I had two of the best men I had watching that hole so there wouldn't nothing come in at it. They let a German come in there and shoot at us. They shot, and the bullets hit right between us. We seen it spark when it hit the gravel, you know. And they never did see these Germans that come in. But anyway, that's what that was about. And anyway, why, after it got good and dark, then why, we began slipping out of there, two of us at a time. We'd figured out a way, I think, to get around them, and we did. That's the way we got out of the farmhouse. And we had to tack the next morning and take it back. We were in Belgium, taking Belgium, and we fought all the way across Belgium. I don't know, somewhere or another they got it in the head I was an Indian, and I have got a little Indian blood. Nearly every night I had to take a patrol across the river to find out where the Germans was. Well, I could tell them where the Germans was. I'd seen them shooting them guns. I knew where they were. But to satisfy that higher bunch, why, we had to cross, usually as a river we'd park behind. We went across the Ruhr and the Elbe. One of these times when I come back with my foot, I guess it was, before I got back to the company, why, this officer said, sure glad you're back. We're going on patrol tonight. I said, you could have waited till I got back to the company at least to tell me. Anyway, I had to take them on patrol. And I hardly ever had an officer with me when I went on patrol. I always had about 5 or 6 men. But anyway, why, this officer went that time. And we went across the little, either the Elbe River or the Ruhr in a rubber craft. And then we went up, make contact with the Germans. Well, we got up our ways, and I was leading it. About that time, machine gun hit the bushes right over my head, and I got down and crawled back. Well, I stopped. Before that, though, why, I heard this machine gun when he pulled his lever back and made it, put a shell in. Why, I heard that, and I knew it was a machine gun. So I stopped, and this officer with me said, what are we stopping for? I said, there's a machine gun right in front of us. Him being an officer, why, I said, what are we going to do now? He said, I guess we'll just ignore it. Well, I said, how do you ignore a machine gun? But anyway, I made a move, go on. That thing cut the brush right over our heads. I crawled back to where he was at. I said, you still want to ignore it? He said, let's get out of here. Well, I said, take those men and go on then. I'll stay here, see it, there's nobody following us. And I did. I stayed a little while, and then I fired 3 or 4 shots and went over the bank of that river, went down it because I'd done that at home, you know, time and again. Got on our landing craft, went back to, but anyway, why, we all got back. That's another thing. I took a lot of patrols, and I never did lose a man. I always brought every one of them back. Officers, lieutenants, second lieutenants especially, they didn't last very long. I don't know exactly the way they trained them or what, but seemed like they couldn't keep their heads down, and first thing we know, they was wounded, and we'd have a different one. I know we got one lieutenant in one time. I think he was the first lieutenant. He was good looking enough. He ought to have been a movie star, and a nice fellow. And he got shot in the mouth. Bullet went in one side and come out the other. Of course, we sent him back to the hospital. And a couple, 3 months later, he come back to the company. He had two of the prettiest dimples you ever seen. Didn't hurt his looks a bit. I thought that was kind of unusual. He must have had his mouth wide open when that shell went through. Didn't hurt his tongue or his teeth or nothing. But things like that happened, and you wondered how they could have happened, you know. Another thing like that happened, we was taking a town, and we had what they call dive bombers. I don't know, the AmeriCorps people could tell you what kind of ship they were. But they bombed a house right in front of us and tore it plumb down, right down to the floor. We got up there, and there was a kitchen table sitting there with a basket of eggs on it and never broke an egg. And we looked in the basement, and it had killed 9 people in the basement, the concussion. But it never broke an egg in that table. I've never figured out how that happened, but that was civilians in the basement. That concussion, I guess, went down, you know. But I can't understand why it didn't break them eggs. I guess it was in Belgium. I was going on patrol, and a shell hit close to me, and it hit me in the left shoulder with just a big piece of metal flat. It broke all the hide, but it didn't go in very deep. I went back to well, I didn't go then. We was fighting, and about 3 days later, I had to go back to see about it. I got to where I couldn't use that shoulder. Anyway, I went into the hospital. This nurse looked at it, and I said, well, it don't amount to much. She said, it looks like hamburger meat. Anyway, why, she patched it up good. 3 days later, they sent me back to the front. I had the peg patch on my shoulder. That is when, during the Battle of the Bulge, when the Germans decided to take Belgium back, you know. And they were needing men bad, so they sent me back to the front. But it finally got well. I told this nurse it didn't amount to much, and she said it will when you get old, and it does. I can tell it. One of the time, of course, this was during the worst winter they ever had in '44. I don't think they still claim it was the worst winter that ever had in Europe. There was ice and snow everywhere. And some regiment got in trouble, and they was sending us over to help it just at daylight. And there was ice and snow on the road. And going down this road, and all at once here come a bunch of tanks. And I had my men in a column of 2s, and I said, column of 1s on each side of the road. And that column on the side, why, they all went to the other side of the road. And them tanks got there was German tanks. I don't know how many of them, 5 or 6 German tanks. And they went by us and never did know we were Americans. They went right through the middle of us. They got going. I had my radio man to call battalion, tell them there was tanks a-coming. I didn't know how that ever worked out, but we didn't have anything to knock a tank out with. We'd have to call for artillery, you know. But well, we tried to stay away from them. I know one time why we were in a kind of well, town, but it was had some kind of a. The streets were really wide. I don't know how to explain it, but there was a German tank come down in that shooting at us. Either I guess we called artillery on it, and it knocked the tread off of it. It couldn't go nowhere, but it's sitting there with them Germans in it shooting machine guns at us right in the middle of us. If we hadn't called in on it, I think the thing would have left, you know. But we, in that particular deal, we let them come in there with some kind of machinery and put that tread back on it and got that tank out. We didn't shoot a German while they was doing that. We wanted that thing out of the middle of us, and they took it out. The old Tiger tank had the 90 millimeter gun on it. It'd knock a hole in anything. I went into a basement one time, see if there's any Germans in it. About the time I got in there, I heard racket behind me, and they had a bunch of old mattresses standing up against the wall. I don't know, 2 or 3 of them. And there was some German soldiers coming into it. And I got under them mattresses back there. And they had put we'd have called it whiskey. Called it schnapps. They had hid their schnapps in there, and they'd all come in there to get them a drink of it. And they got one, and I crawled behind them mattresses. I had my pistol loaded with a hammer back and my hand on that trigger on that M1. And there was 3 of them. I knew I could get 2 of them, but I didn't know about that other. But they got their drink and left. And I was pretty close to them then. But I let them go. Well, it's not hard to shoot a fellow and him over shooting at you. It's kind of hard to shoot a fellow and him walking off. I don't think that had anything to do with it, but I didn't take a shot at him. I was glad they got out of there is what I'd done. We took German prisoners when the war was just about over. I guess they knew that. I know one time I was on patrol, and I run onto a whole column of them, and every one of them throwed their hands up and give up. There wasn't any way we could have even fought our way out of them, you know, but they was ready to quit. And we had them throw their rifles away and told them to go on that way. They'd find somebody that could take them. And I don't know whether you could explain it or not, but they had me at Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, and they wasn't going to discharge me until the next day, or I didn't know just when, but anyway, I stayed all night there in Camp Chaffee, and that next morning before I woke up, or about the time I woke up, they were calling me to come to the orderly room. And I couldn't figure out what in the world they're calling me for, you know. I went up there, and there stood my mother and daddy. We lived about probably 40 miles from Fort Smith. But a boy that was across the river from us that was there in Camp Chaffee, and he had seen that my name was on the list to be there that morning. And they come over and told Mom and Dad that I was in there. I never was surprised in my life, and tickled to death to see them, you know. But anyway, why, Dad asked me, said, when can you go home? I said, right now. I wasn't discharged, but I throwed my stuff in the back of his pickup and come home with him. Stayed all night. Of course, I had to go back the next day then and got discharged. They never missed me. But I was, yeah, I see your mother and daddy after 2 years, and it was, well, you knew you was home. I'm going to tell you a little story. I was up at a cafe the other day between here and Skytook, and there was a little girl come up to me. I was eating. She come up to me with a little platter with some toys on it, and you're practically sitting on the thing. That little, right there, that and right there, yeah. Anyway, she had that on there, and she was bashful. She didn't tell me nothing. And I reached over and picked that toy up, looked at it, and she run. And I didn't know whether she give it to me or what, you know. But when I started to pay my ticket, why, I asked the man up there, and I think this little girl belonged to him. And I said, did that little girl intend for me to have this? And he said, yes, she did. She wanted a soldier to have it, she said. And she took it and gave it to me. And I told him, I said, I've got medals, recognition everywhere, and that means more to me than all the rest of them put together. That a little American girl would notice us being a veteran, you know. And after he told me that, then I wrote her a letter. Had him to come to find out it was, I don't know whether he owns the place or just running it or what, but it was his daughter. When I eat in there, I asked him all the time how the little girl is. And he said she's doing just fine. First thing, I want them to think that I'm an honorable man. I'm not. I never drank. I never smoked. I never drank. Never stole nothing. I've been an American. That's what I want him to think, that he is an American. I'd like for him to remember just what a sacrifice that the United States has made liberating other countries and keeping them. Now, World War II had to be fought. We didn't have no choice. But all these others we've had a choice. But World War II, we had to fight it. I want them to know that it was something that just had to be done. I didn't want to go, and I sure wouldn't have volunteered, but I've done my part when I was asked.
Absolutely. God bless you, and thank you for all your time, Mr. Parker. It's been such an honor